This week I'm talking about how realistic optimism can improve your mental health and well-being. So, let's talk about mental health. This is Let's Talk About Mental Health, a weekly podcast about mental health and well-being hosted by Jeremy Godwin. Let's talk about mental health, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hello and welcome to episode 47 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, the weekly podcast full of simple ideas for better mental health and well-being. I'm Jeremy Godwin, thank you for joining me. Very quickly before I begin today, this episode goes out on the 5th of October here in Australia, and October the 7th will be the 1-year anniversary of Let's Talk About Mental Health. So I just want to say an enormous thank you to all of you for supporting me and continuing to support me as I grow this program. As at the 1st of October, Let's Talk About Mental Health now has listeners in 96 countries worldwide, and weekly downloads have grown by over 68% in the last month alone, which now puts this show firmly in the top 20% of podcasts worldwide and eyeing off the top 15%. So I'm feeling incredibly grateful. There's heaps of new stuff coming in the next few months, so make sure you sign up to my email list at letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au/subscribe, where you'll be the first to receive updates. I'm feeling very optimistic about what the next year of Let's Talk About Mental Health has in store, which is probably a nice transition into this episode, which is all about optimism. So, let's get talking. If you've turned on the news lately, you might be forgiven for thinking that the entire world is a complete dumpster fire, and that 2020 has been nothing but a smouldering pile of manure, especially since good news stories are few and far between in terms of what the major outlets tend to cover. But the truth of the matter is that things aren't getting worse. They've actually been getting considerably better for quite a long time, in spite of all of the challenges that we're facing. Yes, we're in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crisis, and we're also dealing with the whims of politicians who are more interested in their own power than anything else. But let's talk about what has changed for the better. As noted in a 2018 article from Psychology Today, which I'll include a link to in the transcript, we've seen a number of major changes. First, a decrease in extreme poverty from around 36% in 1990 to just 10% worldwide in 2015. We've also seen a rise in gender equality in many countries around the world, not just industrialized nations, as well as an enormous increase in literacy levels. In 1960, only 42% of people in the world could read and write. Today, it's roughly 83%. And we've also seen an increased average life expectancy. Across the globe, life expectancy was just 30 years back in 1820, and in 1960 it was only 56. Today, worldwide, it's around 70 years. And then on top of those statistics, let's also talk about the elephant in the room that might be of particular interest for any of you who have had to deal with some of the challenges associated with mental illness. While there's still plenty of work to do to break through stigma, we've come a very long way, and treatment is now far more compassionate and, thankfully, effective than the dark old days when anyone who was deemed to be something other than normal would be thrown into a lunatic asylum to rot away, while undergoing treatments that would make the Marquis de Sade look like Mother Teresa. Here's my point. The world isn't such a bad place to live, and in fact it's pretty good and worthy of being optimistic about. Of course, it's not without its problems, and, to pretend otherwise would be delusion. But the thing about progress is that it's often not until afterwards that we're removed enough from the emotion of it all to be able to then see the bigger picture. And how you choose to look at things, good, bad, or indifferent, is exactly that, a choice, and one that will then influence how you feel, speak, and act, which just happen to be the three things that are in your direct control, and the things that will shape the way you experience life. And so that's where optimism comes in. It helps you to celebrate the good stuff while also looking at the shitty stuff with a solution-focused lens, rather than being bogged down by the weight of it all. But I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. First, though, what is optimism and what is realistic optimism? Optimism is defined as hopefulness and confidence about the future or the success of something. You would have no doubt also heard of its opposite, pessimism, which is a tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe that the worst will happen. Optimism applies to a lot of different things related to your mindset, such as having belief in yourself and taking a chance on possible success by trying something, compared with pessimism, which is more about giving up and thinking, well, what's the point? So for example, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I hadn't have taken a risk and believed that I could try something new. And that takes a leap of faith and a belief that the future will work out for the best, regardless of what happens, win, lose, or draw. Now, for the purposes of today's conversation, I'm ignoring the philosophical definition of optimism, which tends to focus on the notion of good versus evil, which, to be quite honest, is a very black or white way to view the world, and I think it's far too heavy of a conversation to get into here. But interestingly, that whole black or white, either or philosophical definition is something to consider because, as with most things in life, it's rarely ever so clear-cut. I won't bore you with the theory side, but there's a whole range of research out there which basically says that there's a sliding scale from extreme and unrealistic optimism to extreme and unrealistic pessimism, and then slap bang in the middle you'll find realism, and then on either side of that, realistic pessimism and realistic optimism. So let me focus on realistic optimism for a little bit. I came across a great definition in an article on Psych Central, which I'll link to in the transcript. And there's a particular quote which I think defines realistic optimism perfectly. Realistic optimists are cautiously hopeful of favourable outcomes, but they do as much as they can to obtain the desired results. The unrealistic believe it will all turn out well in the end, and do not do what is required to achieve that. People measured as realistic optimists also tend to have other desirable traits, such as extroversion and cheerfulness. But non-positive thoughts and moods are also important and are certainly not always bad. And again, the link for that is in the transcript. Here's the thing. Realistic optimism is about positive belief rather than unrealistic optimism, which is about delusion. This is the problem with a lot of stuff out there about mindset and mental health, where there's often a big focus on always thinking positively or having good vibes only 100% of the time. That's unrealistic. Life is full of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the challenge for each of us is to learn how to respond to what happens around us and within us in a way that keeps us moving forward and growing. I mean, when I die, if I discover that the meaning of life isn't to be a little bit better every single day, then I will be very surprised indeed. I think we tend to overcomplicate a lot of things in life, and it often comes back to this search for meaning and the desire for control that underpins the notion of existence for a lot of us. But I think I'm getting into a philosophical conversation that might be better left for another day. Back to my point. Let me share a quote by Norman Vincent Peale that I think sums up the whole optimism versus pessimism thing quite nicely. A positive thinker does not refuse to recognize the negative, they refuse to dwell on it. Positive thinking is a form of thought which habitually looks for the best results from the worst conditions. It is possible to look for something to build on. It is possible to expect the best for yourself, even though things look bad. And the remarkable fact is that when you seek good, you are very likely to find it. And so with all of that in mind, let's talk about why realistic optimism matters for better mental health. Realistic optimism continues on from the different mindset-related topics that I've been talking about over the past few episodes: self-esteem, forgiveness, assertiveness, and gratitude. However, it's a much more fundamental component of good mental health because it goes to the core of the way that you see the world around you, as well as how that relates to the world within you. Having an overall positive mindset and being able to objectively view setbacks as challenges rather than disasters means that you are better equipped to deal with the good, the bad, and the ugly of life. According to Very Well Mind, some of the benefits of optimism include better physical health, increased lifespan, greater achievement. For example, optimistic sports teams have been demonstrated to perform better than pessimistic ones. Persistence, emotional health, for example, the ability to more effectively handle future setbacks, and reduced stress. Let me also read this quote from the same article. Because optimists believe in themselves and their abilities, they expect good things to happen. They see negative events as minor setbacks to be easily overcome, and view positive events as evidence of further good things to come. Believing in themselves, they also take more risks and create more positive events in their lives. And I'll include the link in the transcript for that article. Optimism helps to give you the courage to take chances and try new things. And it gives you the courage to face your fears and overcome them. I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Starting this podcast was terrifying. The idea of putting myself out there in such a public way, while, sharing all of this stuff about my personal life as a way of providing examples, was horrifying. And I'll be very honest and say that I've definitely been tempted more than once to crawl back into the safety of my shell. But I took a risk, and then another, and then another, and now here I am a year later doing what I love doing. Life is about taking sensible risks and pushing yourself forward so that you can grow. And without a positive mindset, that can be pretty hard to do. And so I guess that brings us nicely to the how-to part of this week's episode. How to be more realistically optimistic. So, if I had $1 for every time that I say this in Let's Talk About Mental Health, I would have a lot of money by now, and my regular listeners probably know what's coming next. Having a realistically optimistic mindset starts with choice. Surprise! I mean, at this point, I've said it so often that I may as well have it tattooed on me. But I stand by the fact I keep on coming back to the notion of choice in basically every episode, because the truth of the matter is that how you experience your life is up to you. You have limited control over what happens outside of your own words, actions, and feelings. And when I say limited control, I mean that you can influence some things, but the majority of circumstances are completely outside of your control. And so if that's the case, you're then left with two choices. Number one, see things as happening to you and react accordingly. Or number two, see things as happening around you and that you have the power to consider what you do next, then responding thoughtfully. One helps you to progress and grow as a human being. The other strips your power and keeps you a victim of circumstance. The choice is always yours. I don't know about you, but I'm putting my money on the one where I get to choose my own adventure. Did any of you used to read those as a kid? I absolutely love those. Anyway, back to the topic. The broader point here is about knowing that to practice realistic optimism takes conscious choice, and it's something that requires work daily. It's no good just saying, I'm an optimist, and then letting every bad thing that happens drag you down into the pits of despair. And yes, I know firsthand just how hard it is to fight that when you're dealing with issues like depression. But this is where that one day at a time thing comes in. Let's use a current example, COVID-19. The unrealistic pessimist might think that it's the end of the world, while the realistic pessimist might think that it's not quite the end of the world, but they're definitely going to end up catching it and becoming very sick. The realist might just throw their hands up in the air and say, well, it is what it is, and I can't do anything about it. So there's no point trying not to catch it because I'll probably just get it anyway. Whereas the realistic optimist might think, I have a choice about where I go, what I do, and what precautions I take in order to minimize my risk and the risk of potentially also transmitting it to my loved ones, like wearing a mask and washing my hands. And of course, then there's the unrealistic optimist who might just think, well, this isn't ever going to affect me, and then head out and start licking complete strangers on the face because they believe they're invincible. Seriously though, the difference in all of those examples is conscious choice. You can take all the information out there and combine it with your own perspectives to then make an informed and logical decision, which is realistic, in other words, knowing that you're not invincible, but also positive, in other words, having the belief that it's not the end of the world, because it's not. And then choosing to take things one day at a time, because there's no constructive point in trying to figure out what tomorrow may hold. That choice sits with you, and it can be a real challenge to override your fears and insecurities, especially when something major like COVID's going on. But it is possible, with time, effort, and perseverance. Speaking of, my next point is to reframe setbacks and negative events as challenges. Martin Seligman, who's considered one of the founders of the field of positive psychology, wrote this sentence in an article in Harvard Business Review. People who don't give up have a habit of interpreting setbacks as temporary, local, and changeable. For example, thinking it's just this one situation and I can do something about it. And the link to that article is in the transcript. Also, that article is about Seligman's work with the US military on building resilience and optimism. It's worth a read, especially for anyone in a leadership role who might be thinking about this stuff, which can have a hugely positive effect in the workplace as well. Just saying. Anyway, so the whole point there is about reinterpreting the way that you view negative events and reframing those setbacks and negative events as challenges. Next, recognize that results won't just happen without effort. Now, I'm a big fan of the whole positive thinking movement, but unfortunately there are some people who may or may not fall into the unrealistically optimistic category that seem to think that all you have to do is believe and your wildest dreams will come true. That's lovely, but it's inaccurate, and it sets a lot of people up for failure, which can then have a negative effect on our ability to believe in all the possibilities of life. Yes, anything is possible with time, effort, and perseverance. Do you want to lose weight? That's absolutely possible. It just takes work, and it won't happen overnight. Do you want to build a business or share your passion with a wider audience? Well, guess what's involved? Work, along with time and perseverance. Look, we'd all love to be able to twitch our noses and make things appear like Samantha from Bewitched. I swear my pop culture references are getting more and more out of date, but anyway. But life just doesn't work like that. And no amount of wishing will make it so. If you want something to happen, it involves equal parts of belief in its possibility and actual effort. The good stuff comes when you have a solid belief in the potential of what you're doing, as that helps to drive you to do and be better. My next point is to look for solutions instead of focusing on problems. If you focus on the problem, then that's all you'll see. Whereas if you acknowledge the problem and then consider possible solutions, you're well on your way to overcoming whatever it is. Sometimes that means taking a break and coming back to it. Sometimes that means looking at it from a different perspective. Sometimes that means getting help, and sometimes that means walking away entirely. But if there's a problem that can't be solved, I'm yet to come across it. Next, choose to view negative events as challenges or even opportunities. And this is an extension of that previous point that I made, and I will say up front that it is hard. It takes a lot of time, effort, and perseverance, so I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but it is possible to choose to see shitty things in a more optimistic way, and therefore believe that things will work out positively. Let me give you a current example in my life. I mentioned recently about my mother's dementia, but what I didn't share at the time is that she's now been moved into an aged care home, and then last week her house was cleared out. So the rental home that she's lived in for 42 years, my childhood home, is no longer her home, or mine for that matter. I've had a lot of emotions about it all, and look, it could be easy to focus on the loss and all the worries about Mum, but realistically, it's the best thing for all of us in the family. Mum's now actually getting the care she needs, which she'd been refusing for a very long time. Her sisters now get peace of mind, and in particular one of my aunts gets a massive amount of time back because she'd been doing a round trip of roughly 4 hours from her home to Mum's several times a week to go look after everything. And now I also have less guilt about thinking that I should be doing more for my mother. So even though this period has been rough, it's also been a positive opportunity. My point here is that the choice is always yours. You can choose to focus on the negative, or you can take a step back and look at the possibilities that might come from events, which then helps you to find the strength you need to persevere through the challenging times. The next point is kind of related to a couple that I've made, and it's to separate people from events. Now, whether this is at home or at work or in the wider world, we need to be realistic and remember that people aren't just people, and nobody is perfect. I think that, especially when it comes to our loved ones, but also people in high-profile positions of power or influence, such as politicians, celebrities, business people, etc., there can sometimes be this expectation that they're perfect, or there's a projection of all these hopes and dreams onto them. And then we end up disappointed when they inevitably turn out not to be perfect after all, because nobody is. I choose to expect the best of people, but I also don't put them on a pedestal. And I'm realistic about what I expect because nobody is perfect. So it's about managing your expectations. And then to finish up the how-to section, there were a few points in an article on HuffPost by Mara Karpal, PhD, in an article called 6 Tips for Becoming a Realistic Optimist, which I thought were worth sharing here, even though it's a bit longer than what I would normally quote. And I'll put the link in the transcript for this as well. So the 6 points are, and I'm quoting directly here, number 1, combine a positive attitude with an honest evaluation of the challenges you may meet along your path. Along with imagining what it is you would like the outcome to be, imagine the steps you will take to overcome the challenges. Number 2, expect the unexpected and know that you have the inner tools to deal with unexpected challenges. Number 3, don't obsess about unpleasant events. Dr. Martin Seligman, in his book Learned Optimism, suggests doing something you enjoy to take your mind off of the situation and to get yourself back into a better feeling state. Then come back to the situation with a problem-solving attitude. With this approach, you'll be more likely to think of better, more creative solutions. Number 4, contribute positively towards someone else's life. When you get yourself out of yourself enough to help someone else, it begins the flow of positive energy. Number 5, humour is another way of completely changing a negative, pessimistic view into a more positive view. Humour immediately changes your mood and produces feelings of joy, amusement, hope, and confidence. It helps to provide you with a new perspective about problems and stresses. Have you noticed that if you make light of a situation, that situation loses its power to make you feel threatened? And number 6, finally, following the basics of self-care can have an influence on your attitude when faced with a stressful event. For example, exercise and meditation help to release endorphins, thereby creating a more positive attitude. Eating well and sleeping well are both important for positive mood and effective brain functioning to help you to be a better creative problem solver rather than a pessimist. And again, the link is in the transcript for that article. In point number 3 there, the author mentioned the book Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman. And as I'm wrapping up today, I'll just say that if you're after some further reading on the subject, I'd highly recommend that book for a practical guide, which is written by one of the leading thinkers in the field of positive psychology. And especially if you lean more towards pessimism, the book actually gives you practical ways that you can start to turn pessimism into optimism. Because when it comes to optimism and mental health, what it all boils down to is this. Realistic optimism helps you to deal with all the challenges that we face in life. It allows you to see the possibilities and to have belief in your ability to both shape your destiny and make things better where you can, while also helping you to accept those things that cannot be changed. Life can be a bit of a roller coaster, and it's inevitable that we'll face difficulties sometimes. But being realistically optimistic means that you're able to deal with things even if they don't work out the way you'd like them to. And that helps you to respond more thoughtfully to events, rather than just reacting to them, which gives you much greater control of how you experience this thing we call life. Each week I like to finish up by sharing a quote about the week's topic, and I encourage you to take a few moments to really reflect on it and consider what it means to you. This week's quote is by an unknown author, and it is, "A pessimist sees a calamity in every opportunity. An optimist sees an opportunity in every calamity." Let me repeat that. A pessimist sees a calamity in every opportunity. An optimist sees an opportunity in every calamity. Alright, that's nearly it for this week. Next week, I'll be talking about control. Continuing October's theme of Foundations of Good Mental Health here on Let's Talk About Mental Health, and in recognition of World Mental Health Day on the 10th of October, as well as other initiatives worldwide this month. Next week, I'll be diving into control, which is one of the things that I discuss a lot on this show. I'll be talking about what control is and why we crave it, the impact that effectively managing your need for control can have on your overall well-being, and how to manage the need for control on a day-to-day basis in order to improve your mental health. I hope you'll join me for that episode, which will be released on Monday morning in Australia, New Zealand, and the rest of the Asia-Pacific region, Sunday night in the UK, Europe, and the Middle East, and Sunday afternoon in the US, Canada, and the rest of the Americas. You can find past episodes and additional content at the website, which is letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. And you can also find Let's Talk About Mental Health on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at LTA Mental Health, as well as on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform and tell someone you know about the show, because word of mouth really helps new people to discover the program. Thank you very much for joining me today. Look after yourself and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world, because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time.